Shas Illuminated presents the following shir by Rabbi Aaron Sorsher. Maseches Yoma has been dedicated by Mr. and Mrs. Shmuley Katz, Le'iloi Nishmas Maris Hanel Abbas Reb Shraga Fleischman, and Reb Shimon ben Reb David.
Learning Maseches Yoma, Daf Samaches. We're going to start the shir at the end of Daf Samach Zayin Amid Beis. Before the Mishnah, the Gemara of Eimesai Metame Begadim. The Gemara is going on the Mishnah, which brings a Machlekes Tanoim. The din is that the Meshaleach is a Sor LaAzazel Yichabes Begadav, the Pasuk says. The one who takes out the seer for Azazel, he has a din of Kibus Begadim, which means he becomes Tameh, he becomes a Rishon L'Tumah, and also Yichabes Begadav, which means that the clothing that he's wearing, or really anything that he's touching, any keli that he's touching also becomes a Rishon L'Tumah. Normally someone who's Tameh, who's just a Rishon L'Tumah, can't be Metame Kelim, can't be Metame Begadim. He can only be Metame Eichlon and Mamashke, make them a Sheni L'Tumah. But Kelim Begadim, he can't be Metame altogether, unless someone's an Avatuma. But the Meshaleach as a Sar LaAzazel, he doesn't become an Avatuma. But B'shas the Shiluach, while he's bringing the Shiluach, then not only he becomes Tameh, but anything that he's touching becomes Tameh. That's Yechabes Begadav, his Begadim become Tameh. And the question is, when is he called the Meshaleach as a Sar LaAzazel? When is he considered that he's a Meshaleach Sar LaAzazel, that he needs Kibus Begadim, that means anything that he's touching, the clothing that he's wearing becomes Tameh? And the Mishnah says, from the time he goes out of the walls of Yerushalayim, and from the time he throws it off the tzuk. Till then he's not called a Meshaleach as a Sar LaAzazel. So the Gemara says, Taner Rabbanan, ha-Meshaleach Metame Begadim, ve'en ha-Shaleach es ha-Meshaleach Metame Begadim. Only the one who's actually bringing the Sar is Metame Begadim, but the one who's Meshaleach es ha-Meshaleach, he's sending the one bringing the Sar, he's not Metame Begadim. What's the Meshaleach es ha-Meshaleach? So Rashi says, the Meshaleach is a Malavim Eisim Yerushalayim, the ones who are accompanying them from Yerushalayim. And that's the pshat of other Rishayim. The Rimil says this, and the Meiri also brings it down. And the Meiri brings down another pshat, that the Meshaleach as a Meshaleach means the Kohen Gadol. He is the one that gives the Sar to the Meshaleach to send it off to Azazel. So he's the Meshaleach as a Meshaleach. He does not become Tameh. So the Meiri second pshat, the Shver, the Siachitzuk also brings the pshat from the Carbon Iron, a pirish on the Sifra, but he says it's shver because what's the havmin of the Kohen Gadol becomes tameh because he's Meshaleach as a Meshaleach. If he would become tameh, how could he finish the avodah? The pasuk's mavur that he finishes the avodah, that l'chayr alone should tell you that he doesn't become tameh. If he's tameh, how could he do the avodah? No, maybe tameh hutshu b'tzibur al kapan, and that's a siachitzuk's kasha. So Asemis is also bothered by it. But the Asemis is also bothered with Rashi. Rashi says that Meshaleach means the Malavim Eisim Yerushalayim. What does it mean the Malavim Eisim Yerushalayim? Why are they the Meshaleach Esim Meshaleach? They're not sending the Meshaleach, they're just going with him. What's the Havman that they'll become Tameh, that we need a pasuk Exeris Akasav telling you that they don't become Tameh, they're only the Meshaleach Esim Meshaleach. They're not even the Meshaleach Esim Meshaleach. They're just walking with him. So the Asemis says his own shad, that the Gemara had said earlier that if the Meshaleach becomes sick, he could send it with someone else. So that's what it means, Meshaleach es a Meshaleach. If he becomes sick and he sends it with someone else, you would think he's called the Meshaleach. Kamash Mala, no, he's not the Meshaleach, he's just the Meshaleach es a Meshaleach. He's sending it with someone else, so he doesn't become a Tam Begadim. That's what the Sfas Emes learns. It could be the Ritva means that. The Ritva says, very bekitzer, the Ritva says, Ein Shaleach es Meshaleach Tan Kibus Begadim. The Ritva says, Pirish, Sheha-Meisrei l'Mishalchai ein etan kibus l'begadim. The one who gives it to the Meshaleach doesn't need kibus begadim. So maybe he means like the Meiri, that the Kohen Gadol, who gives it to the Meshaleach, doesn't need kibus begadim. It doesn't say that. He doesn't say the Kohen Gadol. Could be he means like the Sfas Emes, that if he was supposed to be the Meshaleach and he got sick, and he gives it to another Meshaleach, so he doesn't need kibus begadim. He's just the Meisrei l'Mishalchai. He doesn't need kibus begadim. That in the Yerushalmi, there's Yerushalmi, the Mefarshim in the Yerushalmi have this machlokes. The Carbon Eida learns like Rashi, and the Pnei Moshe learns like the Sfas Emes, like we're saying. Because the Yerushalmi says like this, Yerushalmi has a shayla if he could send it biyat two people. Are you allowed to be Meshaleach biyat shnayim? And the Yerushalmi brings a raya from this brisa. The brisa says that the Shaleach is with time begadim, and ain't a Shaleach as a Meshaleach with time begadim. So the Yerushalmi says that's a raya that you cannot send it with two people. So the Carbon Eida learns, like Rashi, that Ein Shaleach as Shaleach means the one that's Malavin the Meshaleach, the ones who accompany the Meshaleach. And the Yerushalmi's raya is like this. If you could send it by two people, so then why is the official Mishlech why is he the only Mishalech? The people that accompanying them, maybe they're also the Mishalchim. There's a few people going together to the Azazel. So that the Yerushalmi says, Vaisis, you can't send it with two people, because there's a Mishalech, and everyone else is not the actual Mishalech, that the Mishalech is a Mishalech, they're just accompanying, so Mela, they're not Matayim Begadim, which is like Rashi's Pshat, that the Shalech is Shalech means the people who are accompanying them. And about this Vasemis Kasha, what's the Havamina that they should be called a Mishalech? The Dvar Avram says the Teretz, Dvar Avram, Chelik Beisim and Ches, he says that the Pshat Mishlech doesn't mean the one who's throwing him off the cliff. So male, the ones who are accompanying them, they're not throwing him off the cliff. Mishlech means the one who's accompanying. A Mishlech as a Sar Lazazel means the one who's accompanying the Sar, like Vavram Halachim El Mishalcham. It means the one that's Malava. He's walking with the Sar to the Azazel. So he's the Mishalech, and the other people are the Mishalech as a Mishalech. They're accompanying the Mishalech. Mishalech Gufa means Levay. It doesn't mean a lashon of sending, it means a lashon of accompanying, like Avram Halachim El Mishalcham. That's how he wants to answer. But that's the carbon Eidus Pshat in the Yerushalmi. To play Mesha, he learns like the Sfas Emes, that he says Yerushalmi Shaila was, could you send it with two people? Meaning, could you have a relay team? Could you have one person bringing a part of the way and the other person bring it the other part? And that is being a raya from this brisa that Mishalech Matayim Begadim. Ve'ena Mishalech is Matayim Begadim, that only one is Matayim Begadim, but if you send it to someone who's sending it, you're not Matayim Begadim. Vaish says you can't send it B'yat Shnayim, because only one of them is called a Mishalech, not two of them. And he brings in the Mari upon him, Rashi's Pshat, that Mishalech means the one who's accompanying him, and he asks his Vasemis Kasha, that why is it considered Mishalech as a Mishalech? But again, that's L'shitase, like the Vasemis, it learns that Mishalech means to send, and to actually throw it off the cliff, so the ones who accompany him are not doing that at all. That's why he learns it means that one person is bringing it, and then he's sending it with another person, like the Gemara said before, the Chalei Mishalche B'yad Acher. But for the Karban Eida, that learns like Rashi, that Mishalech as Mishalech means that they're going together, he can learn like the Dvar Avram says, that Mishalech means to accompany like Avram Halachim El Mishalcha. The Raisa continues, Yachal Mishiyatza Chutz L'chaim Azar. You would think that you already called the Mishalech when you go out of the Chaim of the Azar, Tamlei Maha Mishalech, Iya Mishalech Yachal Shigil L'tzuk, maybe only called the Mishalech when you reach the cliff, L'tzuk, Tamlei Veha Mishalech, Hakesa Mishiyatza Chutz L'chaim Mishalayim, Div Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says you call the Mishalech when you go out of the Chaim of Yushalayim. So the Sfas Emes, like we said, which learns that Mishalech means the throwing it off the cliff, he has a Shaila, is the Pshat that maybe the Pshat is only called the Mishalech when he goes out of the Chaim Yushalayim, if he ultimately is the one that throws it off the cliff. If he's not the one that throws it off the cliff in the end, so he's never the Mishalech. It's just if he throws it off the cliff, so then the Mafreya, his Shiluach started from the time he went out of Yushalayim. It's one big Shiluach, bringing it from Yushalayim to the Tzuk. But if he didn't end up bringing it all the way to the Tzuk, so he never was the Mishalech as a Sar La'azazel, so he doesn't become Tameh from the time he went out of Chaim Yushalayim. That's what the Sasem is clears. This is the Dvar Avram there in Simon Ches at the end of Eis Gimel also clears a Shaila, but in Eis Yud Beis, he brings clear that both the Kesef Mishnah and the Ravid in Hilchas Para, Perikei Halacha Vav, seem to them unclear that even if he doesn't ultimately bring it all the way to the Azazel, as long as he was Mishalech part of the way, at the time that he's Mishalech, he is Matami Begadim. They're both them on that way. So the Dvar Avram holds like he says, the Mishlech doesn't mean that you threw it off the cliff. Mishlech means that you accompany it. So Lamaisa, they called the company, even if ultimately someone else threw it off the cliff. But Lamaisa, you accompanied it the first part, so then you would call the Mishlech at that time, and you'd be Matami Begadim. Like we said, that's what he says from the Kesef Mishnah and the Ravid, that they both them on that way. And that's a right to his Pshat, that Mishlech means the Malava, like Rashi's Mashma. So Mela, even if you didn't ultimately throw it off the cliff, someone else did, but you were Malav at that time, so you'll be Matami Begadim. Now, the Rambam that we mentioned, the Rambam in Ilchas Parah, Perikei Halacha Vav, he says like this. He says that you become Tameh from the Sila Zazli, persons like Rabbi Yehuda, from the time that he goes out of the Chaim Yisraelim, at Shastach Yasel Tzuk. But after he threw it off the cliff, he's not Tameh. That's the Lashon in the Rambam. The only is Tameh from the time he brings it out of Chaim Yisraelim until he throws it off the cliff. But after he throws it off the cliff, he's not Matami Begadim anymore. So the Asagas Ravid says, what's a pshat in the Rambam? What does the Rambam mean that after he threw it off the cliff, he's not Matayim Begadim? If he means that if he's Isaac in it after he threw it off the cliff, he's not Matayim Begadim, it's like the Ravid, that's Pshita. He's not being Mishlech Lazazel anymore. It's already sent. It's finished. It's over. Why should his Isaac afterwards and have any Havim in it to Matayim Begadim? What's the Chiddush of the Rambam? Elamai, the Rambam means that from the time he threw it off the cliff, even if he's not Isaac in it, you might think he becomes like an Avatuma and he continues being Matami Begadim. No, but after he's finished being Mishlech Lazazel, he's no longer an Avatuma. He's only a Rishon Latuma, and he won't be Matami anymore Begadim and Kalim. But he says if that's what the Rambam means, so why did the Rambam have to say after he threw it off the cliff? The Rambam should just say when he's not doing the actual Mishlech, even before it was thrown off the cliff. And here's where you see the Ravid's naming on, that he's Matayim Begadim while he's being Mishlech, even if ultimately he didn't throw it off the cliff. But upon him, that's what the Ravid is bothered with the Rambam. What does the Rambam mean after he threw it off the cliff, he's not Matayim Begadim? If he means the Asik after he threw it off the cliff, that's Pashit. That's not even Mishluch Lazal. It's already Evarim. It's already finished. Elamai, he means that there's a Havim in it, that even if you're not being Asik in it, Stam, if you're Mishlech Lazal, you become an Avatuma, you're always Matayim Begadim. So that fact, the Ravid, he doesn't have to say after he threw it off the cliff. He's just say after he's not doing it anymore. So the Kesef Mishnah says, I've added the second shot in the Ravid is the correct shot in the Rambam. When the Rambam says after he threw it off the cliff, he just means because he's not being Isaac anymore. And who then it applies even before he threw it off the cliff? But Urcha de Milsanaka, the one who's being Mishlech is a Ser Lazazel, normally he doesn't stop working from the time he takes it out of Yerushalayim till he throws it off the cliff. He's going straight. So Memela, he's always Matayim Begadim until he throws it off the cliff, and then he stops being Isaac in it, and now he's no longer Matayim Begadim, he's just now Rishon Latuma, he's just Matayim Echel Namashkim, and he's not Matayim Begadim. But Kenira, the Grach, learned, like the first pshat in the Ravid, that it means when he's being Isaac in it after he threw it off the cliff, and the Grach learned, and this is brought in the Kisvei Agriz at the end of Zvachim, and the Grach learned, the Chaim Soloveitchik learned, that the pshat is, that's like the Gemara says, if it didn't die when you throw it off the cliff, you have to go down afterwards and kill it. So you might think that's also called a Shiluch La'azazel. You might think he's also called a Mishlech La'azazel, because he's going down afterwards and killing it, and that's part of the Avodah of the Seir La'azazel, and you would think he's Matayim Begadim. Kamashma, no. After he threw it off the cliff, even if he continues being Isaac with it, in other words, he's continuing the Isaac by going down afterwards and killing it, so that might be called also a Mishlech Yisrael Azazel. So in that, the Rambam tells you a Chiddush, and no, that's not called a Mishlech Yisrael Azazel. From the time he threw it off the cliff, even though there's continual work to do, the Yerid Achra V'Yamisai, but he's not called the Mishlech Yisrael Azazel, and he's not Matayim Begadim then. Reb Chaim there is bothered, he asks Sa'ara, that Lagabi the Din Isser Ano, which we say that the Sir La'azazel is Mutal Ano after it's thrown off, the Lermater Shalach L'Tekala, from there, it's Mash Maklar in the Rambam, we spoke this out in the previous year, that as long as it's alive, doesn't become Mutal Ba'ano. You have to, until he's Yerid Achra V'Yamisai, until he actually kills it, it's still Asa Ba'ano. Like we mentioned, some Achreinim named not the way the Pri Chadash and the Gvur Sari, but the Rambam is mashma that until he actually kill it, it's Asa Ba'ano. So it sounds like that void of the Seir La'azazel is not finished until it's actually dead, even though he threw it off the cliff, but if it's not dead yet, it's Yerid Achra V'Yamisa, you have to go down afterwards and kill it. It's still that void is not finished, it's still Asa Ba'ano. Masha'ekin l'gabi Tumas Begadim, there the Rambam says it's only Matami Begadim until you throw it off the cliff. Once you throw it off the cliff, it's not Matami Begadim. And like Reb Chaim's learning, it means even though you're being Isaac in it afterwards, you're going and killing it, but still that's not called Mishlech Yisrael La'azazel. So why in regard to Isra Ano do we say that the Avodah of the Seir La'azazel is not finished until it's dead? And in regard to Tumas Begadim, we say that no, the Avodah is already finished once you throw it off the cliff, and there's no longer a Din Tumas Begadim in any Asik that you do after it's thrown off the cliff. That's Reb Chaim's Kasha. So Reb Chaim answers that the Ikka mitzvah is done when you throw it off the cliff. That's the Ikka mitzvah. So you're not called a Mishleach anymore, because Mishleach means throwing it off the cliff. You threw it off the cliff, you finish with the Ikka mitzvah. But there's still the Shiori mitzvah, there's still the Gemara mitzvah wasn't done. The Gemara mitzvah is only when it's killed. So it's not nigma yet, so Lagabi the heter ano has to be totally nasa mitzvah, so there has to be no more mitzvahs being done with it, so mela until it's killed, it's still asa ba'ano. Masheken, in regard to Tumas Begadim is only when you're doing the Ikar mitzvah, which is throwing it off the cliff. That's a shtickle from Reb Chaim. Reb Leib Malin also learns up the Ram that way, like Reb Chaim, that it means that the only time at Shas T'chiyasa L'tzuk, when the Ram says Achar D'chiyasa, he's not Matam Begadim, means even when he's being Isaac and afterwards, like Yerid Achar V'yamisai. But he says a more clear pshat, a more easy pshat, what's the chiluk between this and the din of Isser Anah? He says there's two dinim, there's two mitzvahs with the Sir La'azazel. There's a mitzvah of bringing it La'azazel, bringing it to the tzuk, throwing it off the mountain, bringing it Lamidbar, and then there's a mitzvah of killing it. There's a mitzvah of it dying. The two rayas that there's a mitzvah that it should die. One raya is because it says L'chiyaseh l'tzuk zera shchitaseh, that Lagabe Isis B'nai, the Gemara said before, it's considered a shchita, the fact that you throw it off the tzuk. And Taisus also says Lagabe taking it out of Tumas Nevel is considered a shchita. And you'd only say that if the Torah prescribed this method of killing. If there's no din that the Sar Lazazel had to die, it wouldn't be shaykh to say the Chiyasel Tzuk Zeh Shkitasei. The other eye is from the fact that you even kill it on Yom Kippur and even on Shabbos. If there was no mitzvah for it to be killed, Avada, you wouldn't be allowed to kill it on Yom Kippur or on Shabbos. Obviously, there is a mitzvah that should be killed. Le'edachisa, the ikad din of Sar Lazazel is that it should be brought to the midbar and thrown off the cliff. The ikad din is neskayim through that. That's the din of shiluach. And Ablei Malin learns that's gufat avodas Yom Kippur. The avodas Yom Kippur just should be brought to the midbar and thrown off the cliff. That's the avodas Yom Kippur. The din of killing it, even though it's Deicha Yom Kippur, but the din of killing it is not a din in the avodas Hayom. That's a din mitzad the chefts of the Sar La'azazel. The Sar La'azazel needs to be killed. It's not a mitzvah ba'alma which has to be done with the Sar La'azazel. But that's not a chelik of the avodas Yom Kippur. The avodas Yom Kippur is bringing it to the midbar. The raya is, the Gemara later is brought in Afsamaches, that says that the Kohen Gadol had to bring the Sar to the midbar. And Rashi says, She'enu Yishoyel ha'haskul b'veit acheres v'shegiya Sar l'midbar, She'nema v'shilach as a Sar b'midbar, v'achakach v'tzachel v'chatas yakter ha'mizbecha. Then the Raisa, the Rashi learns that you're not allowed to continue the avodah until the Sar makes it to the midbar. But it doesn't say till the Sar dies. Till the Sar dies, it doesn't have to die. The Gemara, the Mishnah constantly brings the dinim, how do you know it got to the midbar? That said that they brought the sudrin when it got to the midbar, or that they waited 3 milin, or that the lashon became white, but it's all kaven shegia Sar midbar. So you see, klar, v'shilach Sar ha-midbara, that when it got to the midbar, that is gufat avodas Yom Kippurim, then you finish the avodas Yom Kippurim, and then you could continue to avoid it. Then v'schel v'chatas yakter mizbecha, like it says. But that's also negated the din of avodas Yom Kippurim. But avada, you're not yet to the din you have with the Sar. There's a din with the Sar that Azazel is mashman that it dies, and Memela, the Sar has to be killed. But that's not a chelik of avodas Yom Kippurim. So Meli says, Lagabi the heter anah, Kolzman, there's still an avodah left mitzad the Sar. There's still an avodah left with the Sar. So Memel, it's also ba'anah. You still avodah do. It's not asa mitzvasei. Mashenkein, in the din of kibbutz begadim, v'meshaleich as a Sar la'azazel yichamis begadav, that wasn't said in all the avodas with the Sar. That wasn't said on the din misa. That was only said on the din shiluach. The din shiluach doesn't have to do with the din misa. It's a different din. That's the din mitzad avodas Yom Kippurim. On that, there's the din of tumas begadim. The din misa, en echanami, there is a din misa, and the din misa is even daichi Yom Kippur. It's like hekta chalav ve'varim. It's a gemar of the avodah of the Sar La'azazel, but it's not really nikir avodas of Yom Kippurim. And in that, it wasn't said tumas begadim. That's what the Rambam means, that it's only mitam begadim until you throw it off the tzuk. That's when you finish the shiluach. But afterwards, even though you're still doing the avodah of killing it, but still, that's not mitam begadim, because that's not the avodah of shiluach. That's the second avodah of misa. That's a shtickle of Reb Leib Malin. Now, the Mishnah says, Bala Eitzel Pai V'Sar Nisrafim. After the Kohen's finished with the Sir La'azazel, he comes to the Pai and Sar Nisrafim. Karan V'Haitzi Yisei Mureim. He rips them open, he takes out the Amrim. Naslam B'Megas, he puts it in a Kli. V'Hektirim Lagab Mizbech. And like the Gemara says, it's not V'Hektirim, it's Le'Hektirim. And Rashi learns, because you're not being makter right away, you're not makter b'Big Day Lavan. You just put it in the Megas, and it's Le'Hektirim. You're going to makter it later when he puts on the Big Day Zav. Now the Mishnah is mashma klar that the Kohen Gadol is the one that goes and takes out the Amrim of the Par and the Sar. And that's what Rashi says pretty mafurish. Chazle etanu sidu arishin shemasada avodas Kohen Gadol. Uktani bali Kohen Gadol eitz the Par v'Sar imdum lisarif. That the Kohen Gadol comes to the Par v'Sar and rips them open. And there's also mafurish in the Rambam that it's the Kohen Gadol that's the one that goes and cuts them open and takes out the chaylev. The Mikdash David in Siman Chav Dalet tells us why. Why does the Kohen Gadol have to do it? Normally, you're not matriach the Kohen Gadol. Yom Kippurim, there's so much aveda. You're not matriach him to do avedis that someone else could do. What's the inyan of the Kohen Gadol going and cutting open the Par v'Sar and taking out the chaylev and putting in the magus? Why can't another Kohen do it? That someone else do it? So the Mikdash David says that the din of hefshit nituach and a behema, the din of cutting up a behema, is in the Gemara Mavur and Daf Chav Zayin. They need a pasuk saying that it's kasher bizarre. In other words, even though it's kasher bizarre, but it's still an aveda. It is an aveda. Hefshit and nituach that you have by an oila, it's an aveda. Also, in the same thing with taking out the chaylev to burn in mizbech, it's an aveda. So even though it would be kasher bizarre, but it's an aveda. So Mamela on Yom Kippur, all avedas have to be done by the Kohen Gadol. It's not just stam hechatimsa to get out the chaylev because you have to be mak to the chaylev on the mizbech. It's an aved. It's one of the avedas karbanis to prepare the carbon for Torah. So that's the din by Yom Kippur. All avedas have to be done by the Kohen Gadol. There's a shtickle bothered, so you don't find that the hefshin nituach of the carbon tamid and the musafim have to be done by the Kohen Gadol. What's the pshat in that? If it's an aveda and all avedas have to be done by the Kohen Gadol, so why didn't he do this aveda to the other karbanis, to the carbon tamid and to the musvei ayim? But he says it could be like this. The Rishayim Amavur earlier, that the Raisa only the Avedis Yom Kippurim, the Avedis is special for Yom Kippur and Acharei, it has to be done by the Kohen Gadol. Mashenki in the regular Avedis, the Raisa doesn't have done by the Kohen Gadol. The Rabbanan, all the Avedis Yom have done by the Kohen Gadol. So he says that Hefshin Yituach is not mamish the same type of Aveda as even Shkita, even though Shkita is also kasher bizarre. But the Shkita of the Talmud, that's done by the Kohen Gadol. But Hefshin Yituach is less of an Aveda. So Mela, by the Avedis Yom Kippur, like the Par and Sar, there's Nasl Ifnim, which is Mamish and Avedis Yom Kippur. So there, even the din of taking out the Amrim, it's also done by the Kohen Gadol. It's also called an Aveda. Mashain Kain, it's not Genug an Aveda, that by the other Karbanis Hayayim, which are not in Acharei Mos, which are not special for Avedis Yom Kippurim and Acharei Mos, that they should also be done by the Kohen Gadol. That's a shtickle from the Mikdash David. The Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says that Tana Menaska Nituach Basar Oila Ela Orla Gabi Basar. The Nituach wasn't done the way the Nituach of a Basar Oila was done. It was done, Orla Gabi Basar was done with the R on top of the Basar. In other words, by Oila there's a din of Hefshit, there's a din of Nituach. There's a din that you have to be mafshit the Oila, you have to take off the skin. As the Nituach, you have to cut it up into pieces. Here there's a din Nituach, which the Gemara learns out ultimately from Oila. But the Gemara learns out that even though we're learning out Nituach from Oila, but not learning out hefshit from Oila, there is no din hefshit fakert. You're not supposed to take off the skin. It's supposed to be ara gabi basa. The Gemara learns it out from a pasuk. So one ara is that the Brisker Rav says in Hilchas Ma'aseh Karbanis, Hilchas Sul Mikdashim in Perek Yudalid, that the din hefshit by Oila is not a din stam that you can't be mak to the arm immediately after you mafshit it. There's a din hefshit, there's a mitzvah hefshit, there's an aveda of hefshit. And more than that, the Rav says that fakert, because of the aveda of hefshit, that's why you can't be mak to the ar. Because be'emesin you find, even things that aren't a barak Torah, that's him is by Oila, only the basar really is a barak Torah. V'shisra l'secha basar v'adam. Basar is you're supposed to be mak to the basar ha'oila. But the gidim and atzamis, when they're attached to the basar, then you mak to them. When they're separate from the basar, then you're not mak to them. So there is a din that anything that's attached to the basar gets mukter. Mashen came the ar, even though it's attached to the basar, you have to take it off. That's mitzad the din hefshit. The reish doesn't have a din hefshit, so the reish, the head, you mak to it complete. Even with the seir that's on the reish, you mak to all that, even though it's not basar, because since it's attached to the basar, it's batal to the basar, and you can be mak to it. Mashen came the ar you can't be mak to because of the din hefshit. And he says even more than that. Let's say the ar itself would have a din basar. L'mashal, the Gemara brings a raya by Eifes. The Gemara in Shabbos Naf Kuf Ches brings a pasuk that Eifes don't have a din hefshit. So Taisus asks the kasha, what do you need a pasuk telling you that that the ayr didn't have shit by Eifis? Even the nights you makter. You even burn the feathers. So Taisus says, but you would think the ayr is different than the feathers, because ayr there'll be a din have shit, like we're saying. Even though the feathers you could burn, out the din of that's part of the basar, like the seir shibarasha ekvasim. But the ayr could be different because of the din have shit. That's why we need a pasuk there's no din have shit. But the Rav is ma'ir that avanda the ayr of the oif has a din basar. The ayr is basar by an oif. It's edible, it's basar. But still, if there would be a din hefshit, you wouldn't be maktiv, because since it has a din ayr, so memela, that would give it a din hefshit, even though it's also a basar, but the din hefshit that would have mitzad the fact that it's ayr would make it that you can't be maktiv. And that's how he learns, like the ayr of ha'aliyah, which would have a din basar, but since it has a din ayr, it has a din hefshit, and that's why you're not maktiv it. That's one nakuda. So memela here also, even though there's no aktar here, you're burning the whole thing. Avadi, you're burning the ar. It says first in the pasuk you burn the ar, but the behavimini you have to remove the ar from the basar and burn the whole thing. Even though it says that you burn the ar also, because you would learn out this tam a mitzvah of hefshit, not mitzvah that you don't, because you're not mak to the ar, because you don't burn the ar. In this case, by the parent Sav Yom Kippurim, avadi you burn the ar, but still the behavimini of a din hefshit because there's a mitzvah of hefshit. Another nakuda is brought in the Sefer L'Kutim on the Rambam, the Medush Shapsi Frankel. It's an Ilchas Ma'aser Gabanis Perek Zayin Halacha Beis in the back in the Sefer L'Kutim. He brings from the Brisker Rav a shtickle that the Brisker Rav is a shaila. This din that you have to be mafshit before the nituach. Is it a din in the hefshit that the hefshit has to be done when the behemoth is whole, and you're not mafshit evarim, you're not mafshit pieces of the animal, you mafshit the whole animal. That's the din why the hefshit has to be done before the nituach, or is it a din in the nituach? That the nituach has to be done on evarim that are already mufshit. It's a din mitzad the nituach. The nituach has to be done on evarim that's mufshit. If the behemoth is whole, if the oil is on the behemoth, that's a chsaron in the nituach. So he brings the raya from the lashon of Rambam. Bemison, it's the lashon of the Gemara here. Lo yemanascha nituach basar oila el or al gabi basar. That there's a chiluk between the nituach of oila and the nituach of the parim musirim nisraf. And the nituach of oila is without the or. And the nituach of the parim masir neshrafim is with the ar. So you see that din that you mafshid it before the nituach is a din the nituach. The nituach of basar oila should be done on oila without ar, on evarim that don't have ar on them, on evarim mufshatim. And here it's a different nituach. There's a difference in the nituach that the nituach are done with the ar. Vaisis normal, when you do the hefshid before the nituach, it's a din the nituach. The nituach has to be done differently. The Mrs. Rebbeinu Chananel here says it even more clear. The Gemara says, "Ima lahal they hefshit afkan they hefshit tamleim v'kirbo yapirshai." That the Gemara learns that the limud that you don't do hefshit. The Rebbeinu Chananel says, "Klar ima ha'ola nituach acharei hefshit ar b'sara av zeh ha'par nituach acharei hefshetai tamleim v'kirbo yapirshai." In other words, the havmina that you need hefshit is not stam that you learn at the mitzvah of hefshit from oila. The havmina you need hefshit here is just like ba'oila. The reason why you need hefshit is because the nituach should be done on a varm that already mufshit. So memela by parim masiyim neshrafim that you learn from oila, you'd also have a havmina that the nituach should be done on a varm that already mufshit. You have the gzeres hakasav that no, don't make the hefshit by parim masiyim neshrafim. But you see clear the shtickle of the Rav that by oila there's a din in nituach that it has to be mufshit already. And now let's see the Mishnah on Amud Beis. The Mishnah says, Amrulay lekayin gadol yiyah sir lemidbar. They told the kayin gadol the goat already came to the midbar. Umenayin hayadim shegiyah sir lemidbar. Had they know, the kayis hayaisin. Umenifim besujin v'yedin shegiyah sir lemidbar. They had a line of people that they waved the sujin, they waved the cloths, and they were able to send that simon over that the seer came to the midbar. They had a big simon, Mishlaim, and basically do their shleisha milim, halchemil, v'chayzemil, v'shen kedemil, v'yedim shegia sir lemidbar, from Mishlaim till there was 3 mil, and they went there a mil, back a mil, and they waited kedei a mil, and then they knew that the seer came to the midbar. And then the Mishnah says, it's a shaila, this is actually in the Mishnah or Brisa, there Bishmal said that another simon, the Lashon Shal Zahiris, was Karsha Pisah Shal Heichel. And when the sea got to the midbar, the lashon will be malbin, the lashon will turn white. The The Taiz points out that the Tanakam and Rabbi Yehuda hold that the Lashon wasn't on the Pesach Shalechel. There's a Brisa on Daf Samach Zayin earlier that says that originally they had it on the Pesach Shalechel, but when people saw it didn't become white, then they were sad, so therefore they were masakin to put it inside, and then afterwards they masakin to send it along with the Mishalech Esesar La'azazel, and therefore it wasn't there altogether. So according to them, that couldn't have been a siman after there was a takana, not to leave the Lashon Shel Zahiris in the base of Mikdash, but to send it along with the Mishalech, so then that couldn't be used as a siman. The Mashal points out that this was only in the days of Shimon HaTzadik, because then it always turned white. After Shimon HaTzadik, signs it did and signs it didn't, so that couldn't have been used as a siman. That would the answer to Tezyantiv's kasha also, that he wasn't talking about the days where signs it didn't turn white, because anyway that wouldn't have been a good siman. We're talking about in the days where it always turned white, and then it was used as a siman. Now, Rashi says, why did they need a siman? Why did they have to know that the seer came to the midbar? So Rashi says, She'enu eshoy leshaschel ba'avoda acheres ad shegiya sar lemidbar. They couldn't start with another avoda until the sar came to the midbar. And he learns that from a pasuk. Shnev v'shilach is sar b'midbar, v'achkach v'schel v'chatas yakdim izbecha. It sounds like it's a din deraisa that you're not allowed to start another avoda until the sar came to the midbar, until you finish the avoda of the shiluach hasoyer. Now Rashi's l'chayr going l'shitasei. Rashi in the beginning of the 7th parak, but Rashi says that you learn out from Miluim that there's a din kriya. The din kriya is a din deraisa. So Mela it's yishayich to say that Vibalt is a din deraisa of kriya, even though the Gemara says kriya lavavaydi, but the Gemara calls it a tzarich avayda. So you could say it's all nichel in the Gzeres HaKasav that you can't start another avayda, even though kriya lavavaydi, but Akapadim it's a din deraisa, it's a tzarich avayda. They can't start another avodah until the Sarah came to the midbar. Right? It's not so pasha. The Sasemis declares, he brings a Taiz in Megillah that says that there is no kriya midaraisa except for the kriya of Parsha Zachar. And the Gemara Semi also asks that l'chayid only after Mulam only the din of Prisha Shiva. The Brisker Rav brings down from Chaim a different shot why you had to wait till the Sarah comes to the midbar. Not because you're being maschal another avodah, but because you can't leave the Azara. There's a din, you have to stay in the Azara until the Avodah is finished. That's a din, Mehilchas Avodah Yom Kippurim, that you can't leave the Azara, you can't leave the Makam Avodah until the Avodah is finished. That's how the Brisker Rav himself wants to learn why the Kohen Gadol had to stay Lifnai Lifnim until the Anan of the Ketairis went up, because you can't leave the Makam until the Avodah is finished. That's what he said over from Reb Chaim. It's medayik that way in the Rambam. The Rambam says in Perek Gimel Halacha Ches, Kevin Shegiya Sar Lemidbar, Yotze Kohen Gadol Ezes Nashim Likreis B'Torah. The Mashmaya says that you needed the seer to get to the midbar before he leaves the Azara. After seer to the midbar, then he could leave the Azara Likreis B'Torah. So Lefizeh, you don't have to say that Kriyas Torah is deraisa, even if Kriyas Torah itself wouldn't be deraisa. But the din deraisa that he has to, that the reason why that to know that the seer got to the midbar is because there could be a din deraisa that it just can't leave the Azara until the seer got to the midbar. That's how Reb Chaim learns.
The Mishnah feedsfeedburnercomshiurmasechtayomadaf68 in the base, in the beginning of the 7th parak, begins Balei Kohen Gadol Likreis. The Kohen Gadol came in to read from the Torah. Be'emes, this Mishnah is a hemshich from the previous Mishnah in the end of the last parak. Amar le Kohen Gadol higia sar lemidbar. Once they told the Kohen Gadol that the Sar La'azazel has reached the desert, immediately Balei Kohen Gadol Likreis, the Kohen Gadol now begins to read the Kriya of the Yom. Be'emes, Rashi previously had explained that the side of this halacha is that there's a din that we learn out from the fact that the Torah says v'shilach es asar b'midbar, and only afterwards does it say v'eschel v'chatas yakter mizbecha, that there's a din that Kohen Gadol is not allowed to be maschil a new avodah until the previous avodah is complete. The B'rai Meisadi explains that though we come out that the kriya of the Kohen Gadol was just tzarech avodah, but was not an actual avodah, but as far as this halacha is concerned, that suffices for the din that Kohen Gadol cannot begin the kriyas HaTorah until the sar has reached the midbar. However, the Rambam is medayik another nekuda. The Rambam in Perek Gimel Hilchos Avodas Yom Kippurim Halacha Ches says, Kevin Shegiya Sar Lemidbar, once the sar reaches the midbar, Yotze Kohen Gadol as its Nashim Likreis B'Torah. Then and only then can the Kohen Gadol now leave the Azara to the Ezras Nashim, where he would read from the Torah. Rashi just says that the Kohen Gadol is not allowed to begin the Kriya until the Sar La'azazel reaches the midbar. From the Rambam we see something noch weiter, another nekuda. We see from the Rambam that the Kohen Gadol is not even allowed to leave the Hazara until the Sar reaches the Midbar. And the question is why? Well, the Pshat in this is, the way the Brisker Rav explains, in a Michtav in the end of the Sefer, brings down Pshat B'Shem Reb Chaim, that we find an interesting thing by the Ketairis L'fnai L'fnei Yom Kippur as well. There was a din that the Kohen Gadol cannot leave the Kodesh HaKadoshim until the entire Kodesh HaKadoshim was the Smal Ashram became full with the smoke of the Ketairis. The Brisker Rav explained from his father Reb Chaim that this halacha is the halacha which it says in our Mishnah as well, that there's a din in the Avodah that the Kohen cannot leave the Makam Avodah until the Avodah is complete. And the same way when he Higia Sol Midbar, then or only then could the Kohen Gadol even leave the Azar to go to the Azas Nashim to do the Kriya. Who adin since on Yom Kippur, like the Brisker Rav brings down B'Shem Reb Simcha Zelig, there's a special halacha of a Kisa and non HaKatairis, that the Ketairis has to fill the entire Kodesh HaKadashim, and therefore the Avodah is not complete, the Ketairis of Yom Kippur is not complete until the Kisa is Niskayim. The Mele Kohen Gadol must remain in the Makam Avodah until the Avodah is complete. However, there's a question over here. That l'chayr we know, by the Sar HaMishtaleach, besides the fact that it was sent to the Midbar, there was a second part of the process, that the Sar HaMishtaleach also needed to be pushed off the cliff. And if so, we have to understand that yes, though it's true Higia Sar HaMidbar, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's Nasis Mitzvasai, as far as the Din Shiluach is concerned, but what about the fact that it still has to be pushed off the cliff? So the Emes, the Yad HaLevi explains that the Pshat over here in the Rambam and Rashi is that this din that the Kohen Gadol is not allowed to begin the next Avodah until the previous Avodah is complete is Dafka Halachas Avodas which are mutal on the Kohen Gadol. A chelik of the Avodah which is mutal on the Kohen Gadol is mechiyah to stay in the Makam Avodah until that Avodah is complete. And therefore, yes, though it's true that there's still a chelik of the Chiyah L'Tzaik, which is not completed, but that chelik is not mutal on the Kohen Gadol. Mashenkin, the din to send the Sar Lamidbar, Shiluach, V'Shilach, B'yad Ish Iti HaMidbar, the Kohen Gadol has a mitzvah Shiluach to send the Sar to the Midbar that is incumbent on the Kohen Gadol himself, and until that's complete, he may not begin the Kriya. Rabbi Yitzchak Saratskin brings a raya from a Gemara later on in Yomadav Einam and Aleph that we see that the Kohen Gadol is considered the Mishaleach, and the one bringing the Sar to the Midbar is considered his Shliach. The Gemara in Yomadav Einam and Aleph says, Asi Mishaleach Matzah B'Shuk Kohen Gadol. When the Mishaleach comes and he finds in the marketplace the Kohen Gadol, Amrei, he tells him, Ishi Kohen Gadol, Asinu Shlichusacha. We have performed your Shlichus. From here you see that the Din Shlichus is mutal upon the din shiluach of the Sar is mutal upon the Kohen Gadol. The Mishnah continues that when the Kohen Gadol goes ahead to do the Kriya, Mevarech Allah Shmeina Brachas, he says 8 brachas on the Kriya of the Kohen Gadol of Yom Kippur. One of the brachas is Al HaTorah. Now the Yishalmi is before, the bracha of Al HaTorah is that Habaycher B'Torah. He makes a new bracha of Habaycher B'Torah. However, the Rambam in Pirish Mishnai says clearly that the bracha that is said is the regular brachas that are said in the shul on every Kriyas HaTorah of the whole year. Like the Rambam says, L'faneh, you make the bracha of Ashabach Abanim Mikol Ha'amim, and after you finish the Kriya, he makes the bracha of Ashenas Alanu Teras Emes. So we have to understand, how could the Rambam say, Keneged the Yishalmi? The Yishalmi is before that on Yom Kippur, the bracha that's said on the Kriya of the Kohen Gadol is a new bracha of Habaycher B'Torah. Be'emes, the Yad HaLevi wants to explain that the Rambam held that this question of the brachas that are said of the Kriya of the Kohen Gadol, are they the regular brachas that are said the whole year? Namely, Ashabach Rabanu before and then Asher Nas Alanu afterwards, or is there a new bracha of Habaycher B'Torah? This be'emes the Rambam understood is a machlokes between the Bavli and the Yishalmi. Because though the Yishalmi says there's a new bracha of Habaycher B'Torah, however the Bavli on Daf Ayin says clearly, Tan Rabban Al HaTorah, Ki Derech Shemavarchim Beis HaKnesses. The Bavli says that you say a bracha of Al HaTorah the same way that you mavarch on the Torah in the Beis HaKnesses. And from here the Rambam took out that the Bavli indeed argues with the Yishalmi, and the Bavli holds that the brachas that are said in the Kriya of the Kohen Gadol are the same brachas that are said the entire year. But we have to understand what is the pshat in this machlokes between the Bavli and the Yishalmi. So be'emes, the Gvuras Ari comes to explain in Rashi, because Rashi over here, Mesechtes Yumas, and he says the bracha of Al HaTorah, Rashi does not say that one makes a bracha before the Kriya of the Torah. Zak the Gvuras Ari, based on this Yerushalmi, it seems to him that the Kriya of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur is different than the Kriya Satayra that we have the whole year on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. The Kriya Satayra of the whole year, Shabbos and Yom Tov, is a Chayvas Tzibor, it's a Chiyah, it's mutal on the entire Tzibor to hear a Kriya Satayra, to have a Kriya Satayra. Therefore, Zak the Gvuras Ari, Avada, every Yachid is Mechiv to hear the Kriya Satayra. Ashenkin Zak the Gvuras Ari, the Kriya of the Kohen Gadol is a new Kriya, the Kriya of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur is a new Kriya which is mutal only on him, only upon him. Klal Yisrael listens, Klal Yisrael could listen, but Zak the Gvuras Ari, if anything you see from our Mishnah, the Mishnah says those who see the Parvasar on the Serafim do not see the Kriya. So you have this situation where the sum of Klal Yisrael are seeing the Parvasar on the Serafim and not hearing the Kriya. If it's a Kriya of Muto, like Kriya Satayra the whole year, Zak the Gvuras Ari, everyone should be Mechiv to hear. It must be, we see from here, that the Kriya of Kriya Satayra on your Kippur of the Kohen Gadol is a new Kriya which is Muto on the Kohen Gadol. The way the Ram understood this is that indeed this Shaila is telling the Machlekes Babi Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi indeed which says that there's a new bracha b'Abeicha b'Torah, not the regular bracha that one said before normal Kriyas HaTorah the whole year, because the Yerushalmi understood that the Kriyas HaTorah of the Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippur is a unique halacha, which is a Chayvas Yachid, which is his Chiyav to read from the Torah, not incumbent upon Klal Yisrael. And the Ram understood that in this Nekuda there's a machlekes between the Bavli and Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi that held that the Chiyuv Kriyas HaTorah is a new Chiyuv that's mutal on the Kohen Gadol, the Mele is a new bracha b'Abeicha b'Torah. Mashenkin, according to the Bavli, that the Bavli held it's a regular Chiyuv Kriyas HaTorah like every Shabbos and every Yom Tov. Therefore you mavarach on a kederach shemvarach in Beis HaKnesses, and the Ram passing like the Bavli. The Emes, the Yerushalmi later on in Yuma as well, later on that parak says Minayin likriyas haparsha. How do we know this Indian that Kohen Gadol reached from the parsha? Rav Ida b'Shem Rav Yitzchak Darshan says in the pasuk Vayas Kasher Tziva Hashem es Moshe. From Kasher Tziva Hashem es Moshe we learn out the Indian of the kriyas haparsha. The Taisa Rash in the beginning of the 7th parak explains how do we see from here this din that Vayas Kasher Tziva Hashem es Moshe. He explains the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi means to say that from here we learn kriyas haparsha pirish l'haidia she'asa kasher tziva Hashem. And like he says in the beginning, after the Kohen Gadol has finished completing the ikar avodas of the kaparas hayoim, Kairi b'parsha, he reads from the parsha l'haidia she'asa ha'avodas kaseid ha'mekrais, to show everybody, to proclaim that he has performed the avodas kaseid ha'mekrais. Al Kopanim, we see in the Taisa Rosh where he explained to Yerushalmi, this is a miyuchadik kriya that is, we could understand is motto specifically on the Kohen Gadol that he's reading to proclaim that he has performed the avodas kaseid ha'mekrais, but this has nothing to do with the regular kriyas HaTorah in Kol HaTorah Kula. Based on this, the Yad HaLevi wants to explain another machlekes Bavli Yerushalmi l'shitasam. Later on in Samach Tesam and Beis, the Gemara asks, it says in our Mishnah, Kair Achri Mais v'Ach Ba'asa. First he reads Achri Mais, and then he jumps and he reads from in Parshas Emar, the Parsha of Ach Ba'asta, which talks about Yom Kippur. So the Gemara asks, didn't we learn Ein Medalgan B'Torah, that by Kriyas HaTorah one does not jump from one thing to another? And like Rashi explains, because Kriyas HaTorah, the people listening have to understand the mitzvahs and the azharas, and if you jump from one Parsha to another Parsha, it's confusing. So Abai answers, like Kashi Kam Be'inyan Echad, that since you're going to, again, a Parsha later, but it's a parsha which is still talking about the same inyan of the Avodah of Yom Kippur. So since it's the same topic, therefore people are able to concentrate. That is the answer of the Bavli. However, the Yerushalmi asks this very same question, and the Yerushalmi gives an entirely different answer. The Yerushalmi asks, after all we know, you don't jump to read in the Kriyas HaTorah, jump from one parsha to a different parsha. So how come over here we first read in Achrei Mais, then we jump to the parsha of Ach Ba'asar, which is 2 parshas later in Parshas Emar? So Yerushalmi answers, Shan Yehi Shi Siddur Shel Yayim. Over here it's different because it's the Seder HaYayim. And one cannot explain the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi means to say that it's one inyan, the way the Bavli understands. Because immediately after, the Yerushalmi brings a raya to this concept. And it says that Teda, I'll bring you a raya that there's this new Yisayid of Siddur Shel Yayim. Because after all, Shir Ben Lakish taught, B'chol Makim, we know you're not allowed to read the Torah Baal Peh. Dvarim Shebiksvav, Iyat Shel Ayrim Baal Peh. Yet over here, you're reading the Parsha Baal Peh. You see from here a new Yisai that Shan Yachashi Siddur Shel Yayim. So what does the Yerushalmi mean? Zok the Yad HaLevi, the Yerushalmi means to say like this. What's Taka the Pshat? that one over here is allowed to read the Parsha Baal Peh, even though we know generally is a din Dvarim Shebiksav Iyatarash Shel Erim Baal Peh. The pshat is because the Isra Dvarim Shebiksav Iyatarash Erim Baal Peh is halacha dafka said on a kriya of limud. Dafka kriyas hatayra b'tziba, which the site of the kriya is a kriya of limud hatayra. There's halachas in limud hatayra that Dvarim Shebiksav are not allowed to be said Baal Peh. Zakti Yishalmi, the same way that over here you're allowed to read it Baal Peh, because it's not called a kriya of limud, it's just a kriya of the Seder Hayayim. So therefore, who adin the halach is you could jump from parsha to parsha. And the way Rashi explained that the Yisrael of Imedalin is beautiful. The whole problem of Imedalin is that there's a din mitzad the shaymim that they have to understand, because the kriya of liman atayra, they have to understand the mitzvahs. Over here, with the holy site is just a proclamation. The Kohen Gadol is saying that he performed the mitzvahs. He performed the Avodas Hayom properly. Therefore, Zakti Yishalmi over here, there's no din of Emed Dalgin. The emes we could say that Rashi goes with Shitase as well, the way the Gurus Ari is explaining Rashi. Though Rashi does not go like the Rambam, that the Bali and Yerushalmi argue about this din, if it's a Kriyas HaTorah Mutal, a Chayvas Yachid on the Kohen Gadol, or is it a regular Kriyas HaTorah of the Tzibur. Rashi holds that even like the Bali, it's a new gather of a Kriyas HaTorah. The Haraya, Rashi says there is no bracha said before the Kriyas of the Torah, the way the Gurus Ari had explained. We could say Rashi L'Shitase, because Rashi in the beginning of the Mishnah says that Bavlikas Parsha, we learn out from the Miluim that even the Kriya of the Parsha is Ma'akiv. The emes the Rashash, Masechta Saita and Daf Mem Aleph is Nestapik. The Kriya of the Kohen Gadol isn't Ma'akiv in the Avodah or not. Rashi is very medayik that yes, Rashi says it's Ma'akiv, and Rabbi Yashin medayik that way in the Haaretz as well. And the emes, the Rimil Unil and Daflam Halam Bey says that the Kriya is Ma'akiv in his ayil when the Kohen Gadol is Ma'akiv his own carbon. If he didn't do the Kriya, it's Ma'akiv in his Akravas HaKarbon. The way we're saying that the Pshat is, the way the Guru Sari learns, that Rashi learns that there's a new Kriya of a Kriya of the Kohen Gadol. It's not just a Kriya of Kriyas HaTorah of the whole year, but it's a new Kriya that's Shayach to the Stafka, to say the Avodas Hayayim. It's understandable how can you Ma'akiv in his carbon. The emes is, we just have to answer one kasha. The Gurus Sari brings a right to his Yisai that we must say that the Kriya of the Kohen Gadol is a new type of Kriya, that it's a Kriya that's mutter only on the Kohen Gadol himself. The Haraya, it's Mashi from the Mishnah that people watching the Parvasar and the Srafim would not have to go hear the Kriyas HaTorah. If it's a din Kriyas HaTorah of the whole year, so why are they not mechiv to go listen to the Kriyas HaTorah? But be'emes, the way the Rambam learns that this Shaila is a machlekes Babli and Yerushalmi, and the Rambam passes like the Babli that indeed it's a regular din Kriyas HaTorah like the whole year, that Yitaka therefore make the brachas of Asher Bacha Ban Asher Nasan Lanu, because it's a regular din Kriyas HaTorah. If so, you have to understand what happened to the chiyah that's mutal on a person to hear Kriyas HaTorah. How could it be that the people who are Raya Parvas on this Rafah are not mechiv to hear the Kriyah? We can answer based on a chakir, the Achrayim or Chaim Klard, by Kriyas HaTorah b'chlal the whole year. Is it a din that every yachid is mechiv to hear the Kriyas HaTorah? Or is it the pshat that when there's asar anashim, the tzibur is mechiv to have a kriya? If we understand that the pshat is that the Rambam will learn that even the whole year, the Gedach Chiyuv Kriyas HaTorah is a chiyuv that is mutal on the tzibur, but it's not a chiyuv incumbent on every individual. Therefore, as long as the tzibur has the kriya, it's miskayim the din of the tzibur is mekayim, so mele it's not shver from this that they don't have to come here the Kriyas HaTorah. The Gemara talks about a Shiloh where the Bidei Kahuna are nitnuli hanis behen, or lay nitnuli hanis behen, which we'll talk about more about Arichas and Mirtashem on the next daf. Al Kopanim, the Gemara brings a raya to this question where the Bidei Kahuna nitnuli hanis behen. If it says it says the Kehanim would not sleep in the Bidei Kahuna. It sounds like they just did not sleep in it because it could come to a bezayin if a person passes gas while he's sleeping. Mashma, but they would eat the kachim wearing the Bidei Kahuna. So we have a raya from here that Bidei Kahuna are allowed to be used even not l'tzarech havayda. The Gemara answers, "Dil mashani achil b'tzarech havayda." Perhaps achil is different because it is a tzarech for havayda. Like you learned in the pasuk v'achlais amashekupa behem teaches us a din she'elami she'kehanim oichenu ba'il miskapim, that through the eating the kehanim and the kachim, the ba'ilum gets a kapara. Frektas las emes, I don't understand. Why does the Gemara refer to achilas kachim just a tzarech havayda and tzarech for the havayda? After all, the Gemara Psachim on Ayin Beis and Beis says that even achilas truma is called an avodah. Kol sheken achilas kachim, most definitely should be called an avodah. Rabbi Yashu wants to answer this question based on a Gemara in Tumor Chav Gimel and Aleph. The Gemara in Tumor Chav Gimel and Aleph says, Yoichel matam and loymar. Yoichel teaches us that if the amount of kachim the kohen has is only a small amount, he's allowed to eat with the chulin in order that the kachim should be nechal al asayva. There's a din in kachim that it has to be eaten, that one becomes satisfied. And therefore, if he does not have enough kachim, he's allowed to eat together with the chulin. Zakir b'liyashiv, that's what the Gemara means to say. That even when it comes to eating the chulin, one is also allowed to eat the chulin wearing this big day kahuna. So we have a raya from here, that big day kahuna, nitnali hanas bam, you're allowed to be nana from the big day kahuna, not even b'makam avayda. On that the Gemara is ma'al chadil mashami achil, the tzarech avaydahi, that one eats the chulin, though the chulin itself is not an avayda, but at least it's a tzarech avayda, and therefore he has a heter to remain and eat it with his big kahuna. Be'emes in this ikar halacha of achilas kachim, be'emes we have machlekes between the Minchas Chinuch and Beis Halevi in the Geder HaMitzvah. The Minchas Chinuch Mitzvah Kuf Beis, Sifkat and Beis says, Zeh Pasha, it's Pash Bahim that this mitzvah say of achila is like every other mitzvah of achila, like achilas Pesach, Matzah and Mar, that without eating a kazayis, one does not fulfill his mitzvah. However, the Beis Halevi in Chelik Aleph Siman Beis writes clearly that Vadai Neret, the mitzvah of achilas kachim, one does not need dafka kazayis. And he brings a raya from Gemara Psachim Gimel Beis by the Chiluk Lechem Apanim that the Gemara teaches over there that sometimes a person will only get the size of a bean. If a person is only Mekayim his mitzvah with a kazayis, so then how could it be that they only gave him a bean? Zak the Beis Halevi, and the pshat in this is that one indeed is Mekayim mitzvah with only a bean, less than a kazayis. Zak the Beis Halevi, because this is different than every other mitzvah achila. Every other mitzvah achila, like achilas Karim Pesach, and so on and so forth, the mitzvah is that the gaver, the person should do an action of achila. An action of achila is only considered halachically a ma'isa achila only if he eats a kazayis worth. However, by kachim Zak the Beis Halevi, though there's a mitzvah to eat the carbon, the mitzvah is not on the person to eat the carbon. The mitzvah is the person should ensure that the carbon is consumed. There's halacha mitzvah that the carbon needs to be consumed, and therefore, as long as he eats any amount, he's helping that the carbon should be consumed, he's mekayim his mitzvah. Be'emes, there's another shaila in this din of achilas kachim where we learn a din that v'achloisem hashakupar b'hem, which teaches us when the kehanim eat, the bailam gets a kapara through the achila of the kehanim. The Rambam Sefer HaMitzvah and Mitzvah Peites says clearly that this mitzvah of v'achloisem hashakupar b'hem, that through the achila of the kehanim, the bailam get a kapara, is limited dafka to the meat of chatas and asham, dafka to kachi kadashim. So the Rambam that though if he eats kachim kalim, there is some sort of kiyum mitzvah, but most definitely the ikar mitzvah and the din kapara is dafka when he eats kodesh hakadashim, the achila, basar, chatas, and asham, not when he eats kachim kalim like a shlamim. However, Rashi Mesechtes Chulin Daf Yud Beis Amanal from the top to Maskal Pesach says clearly that shlamim also is included in this halacha. Shlam, which is kachim kalim, is included in the halacha of va'achloisim hashakupar b'hem, that through the achila of the kehanim, the bailam gets a kapara. Just to end off, the Brisker says, "Will feed a shitas harambam that the mitzvah of achilas kachim and the mitzvah din va'achloisim hashakupar b'hem, that through the achila kehanim the bailam gets kapara is limited to kodesh hakadashim." He says you can understand that pshat the pasuk in Parashat Vayikra. It says in the pasuk, "Madu alechaltem chatas hayayim." Moshe Rabbeinu tells Aaron, "Why did you not eat the chatas? Ki kodesh kadashim me. After all, it's kodesh kadashim." Zakta Biskaravi was telling them, if it's kodesh kadashim, so therefore there's a mitzvah that the kehanim should eat the basar. The pasuk ends off, "Va'ata nasan lachem laseis oven ha'eda lechaper aleim." After all, this was given to you to be mechaper on the eda, that through your achila of the kodesh kadashim, they'll bring a kapara to Klal Yisrael. And therefore, he asked them, why did he not eat it?
You have been listening to the Shiurim of Shas Illuminated. Shas Illuminated is a non-profit organization dedicated to broadening the learning of those studying the daf worldwide. If you would like to make a donation or to dedicate a daf or masechta, please visit our website at shasilluminated.org or call 203-312-SHAS. You can also email us at shasilluminated@gmail.com.